Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. They begged the universe for help, but only humanity's revenge fleet answered. A dying civilization's last hope, the skis of Zealous, burned. Once this planet had been the heart of a proud and ancient civilization, a shining beacon of culture, technology, and progress. Now it was a battlefield. The mighty towers that had once reached for the heavens lay in ruins, their structures collapsing under the relentless assault of the Dran Empire. The very ground trembled under the weight of endless bombardments, and the once thriving cities had been reduced to smoldering graveyards. The Zelans, a species known for their diplomacy and peaceful nature, had spent centuries fostering alliances, believing that mutual cooperation was the key to survival in a dangerous galaxy. But when the war came to their doorstep, those same allies turned their backs on them. The message was always the same: we cannot afford to anger the Dran Empire. One by one, their so-called friends severed all ties, leaving the Zelan to fight alone. But the Zelan were not warriors. They had always relied on trade, negotiations, and diplomacy to resolve conflicts. Their military was weak, outdated, no match for the unstoppable war machine that was the Drin fleet. The Drens had come like an unstoppable storm, their fleet darkening the skies with thousands of warships. They did not ask for surrender. They did not demand tribute. They came for one purpose only: destruction. Now the last remnants of the Zelvan leadership sat in a fortified bunker beneath their ruined capital, watching the reports come in. The planetary defense grid had collapsed. Their remaining warships had been annihilated. The Drens were systematically erasing their entire race. The end was near. Chancellor Veen, the highest-ranking official still alive, stared at the holographic display with empty eyes. His once pristine robes were torn and stained with blood, his face lined with exhaustion. Around him, his advisors whispered in hushed tones, their voices trembling with fear. "We must send another distress call," one of them pleaded. "Surely someone will answer." Veen let out a bitter laugh. "We've sent hundreds, no one is coming." Silence filled the bunker. The truth was painful but undeniable. Still, desperation had a way of forcing hope where none should exist. One of the technicians, a young Zeldin barely out of training, hesitated before speaking. There is one more option." Veen turned, eyes narrowing. "What option?" The technician swallowed hard. "We could send a signal to the humans." The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. There was no hope in their expressions, only uncertainty. Humans, a species that most of the galaxy knew very little about. They had only recently entered the galactic stage, and though they had not yet fought any major wars, there were rumors, stories of their brutal history, of the wars that had nearly wiped them out, of their unbreakable resilience. But the most disturbing thing, no one truly understood their military power. Unlike other species, humans did not flaunt their weapons, did not display their warships in grand parades. They stayed quiet, observant. Some believed this meant they were weak. Others, however, whispered a different theory, that humans were hiding something. Veen stared at the technician for a long moment. "We don't even know if they'll receive the message." The technician nodded. "We don't, but at this point, what do we have to lose?" The Chancellor exhaled slowly. He looked at the reports again. Millions of Zelan were already dead. If they did nothing, their entire species would be extinct within days. Finally, he gave the order. "Send it." The technician's hands moved swiftly, inputting the emergency distress signal into the system. Unlike the previous calls for help, this one carried no request for negotiations, no plea for alliances. It was a single, simple message to humanity. "We are dying. If you can hear this, help us." The signal was transmitted across the vast emptiness of space, traveling faster than light, reaching deep into the unknown. For a long moment, nothing happened. Veen let out a tired sigh. It was foolish to hope. They had tried everything. This would be no different. But then the console beeped. A response. One of the officers gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. They answered." Veen's heart pounded in his chest. "Put it through." The speakers crackled, filled with static, then a voice. Cold, calm, controlled. "We heard you." No formal introduction, no questions, just those 3 words. A chill ran down Veen's spine. The voice held no emotion, no hesitation. It was the voice of someone who had already made a decision. "Will you help us?" Veen asked, his voice almost breaking. There was a pause, then the response came, short but terrifying in its certainty. "Stand by." The transmission ended. Veen felt his knees go weak. He turned to his officers, barely able to process what had just happened. Stand by? What did that mean? Were they coming? Were they sending aid? His mind raced with questions, but before he could speak, the entire bunker shook violently. The officers panicked, thinking it was another attack, but when they checked the scanners, their breath caught in their throats. A massive tear had formed in space above Zealous. It was not a wormhole, not a rift, but something else, something unnatural. And then from the darkness they emerged. At first it was just one, then 10, then 100. Black, angular warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Silent, ominous, unstoppable. They had expected a few human vessels. Instead, they got an entire fleet. The air inside the Zelvin bunker was heavy with tension, every officer frozen in place as they stared at the scanners in disbelief. The display flickered, struggling to make sense of what had just appeared above their dying world. No one had expected the humans to respond, much less this quickly. Chancellor Veen gripped the edges of the console, his hand shaking. The distress signal had been sent barely an hour ago, and now the scanners were detecting an entire fleet descending upon their planet. How is this possible?" one of the officers stammered. They couldn't have traveled here this fast." Veen said nothing, his gaze locked on the tactical display. The incoming ships moved with perfect precision, their formations tight, their approach calculated. It was not the reckless charge of a species desperate to prove itself, nor was it the slow, arrogant crawl of an empire that believed itself invincible. This was something else. A chill ran down his spine. "Open a channel," Veen ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. The communications officer hesitated, fingers hovering over the controls. You really think they'll answer?" Veen's expression darkened. "We're about to find out." A moment later, the speakers crackled to life. The same cold, steady voice from before filled the bunker. "This is Fleet Admiral Kane of the United Terran Navy. We received your distress signal." The humans had a title for their leader. Admiral. Veen's throat felt dry. "Admiral Kane, this is Chancellor Veen of the Zelvin Republic. We didn't think anyone would come." There was a pause on the other end. Then Kane's voice came through, utterly devoid of hesitation. "You asked for help, we're here." A murmur swept through the room. The words were simple, direct, but there was a weight to them, something absolute. The humans had made a decision, and there was no turning back. Veen swallowed hard. "I don't know how to say this, but we didn't expect you to send an entire fleet. We don't know what to say." There was another pause, as if the human admiral was considering his next words carefully. Then his response came. "Then don't say anything. Just tell us where you need us." For the first time since the war began, Veen felt something he had long forgotten: hope. Above Zealous, the human fleet moved like a storm. There were no wasted maneuvers, no hesitation. They knew exactly what they were doing. The Dran Empire, still busy bombarding the planet, had no idea what was happening. Their massive warships, some as large as cities, loomed over the ruins of Zelaris, raining down destruction. But then their scanners picked up movement. One by one, black silhouettes emerged from the void. Ships unlike anything the Drens had seen before. The sleek, angular vessels cut through the darkness like shadows, their surfaces absorbing light, making it impossible to get a clear read on them. And then, without warning, the first human warship fired. A single, precise shot. It was not a warning, it was a message. The Dren battleship that had been hovering over the capital erupted into flames. The explosion was instant, violent, merciless. The warship, a vessel that had survived dozens of planetary conquests, was torn apart in a single blast. Panic rippled through the Dren fleet. They had fought countless species before, many of them technologically advanced, but this was different. These humans weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to prove a point. They had arrived for one reason only: to annihilate the enemy. The Dricken command scrambled to react, but it was already too late. More human warships opened fire, their weapons cutting through the Dren fleet like a blade through flesh. There was no mercy, no hesitation. The humans fought with a level of precision the galaxy had never seen before. The battle for Zelaris had begun, and the Drens had just made the biggest mistake of their existence. The Dreen fleet, a force that had conquered dozens of worlds, had never known fear. Their warships were massive, their weapons unmatched. They had crushed every species that resisted them, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Until now. The humans had arrived, and they were not like the others. High above Zelaris, the once confident Drikan warships now scrambled to reposition, trying to make sense of what was happening. Their fleet had the advantage, or so they thought. The United Terran Navy had far fewer ships, but that didn't matter because they knew how to fight. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UTS Revenant, his expression unreadable as he studied the battle unfolding before him. His fleet moved like a well-oiled machine, each ship executing precise maneuvers without hesitation. The Drens had numbers, the humans had skill, and skill would win this fight. "Enemy fleet attempting to flank us, sir," one of the officers called out. Kane barely reacted. "They think we're predictable." A thin smirk played at the edge of his lips. "They're about to learn otherwise." He turned toward the tactical display, his voice calm. "Deploy Omega Wing, now." Far from the main battle, a squadron of human strike ships burst from the shadows. The Dren warships had no idea they were there until it was too late. The attack was surgical. One by one, Dren warships erupted in flames, their shields, once thought to be impenetrable, shattered by human weaponry. "Impossible," one Dran commander roared, watching in horror as yet another of their battleships was torn apart. These humans, they weren't fighting like a desperate species. They fought like a force that had already won. On the surface of Zelaris, Chancellor Veen and his officers watched the battle unfold through a flickering hollow display. No one spoke. They couldn't. They had begged for help, expecting nothing, and now, before their very eyes, humanity was turning the tide of the war. The Zelen had studied every known species in the galaxy. They had categorized them by strength, intelligence, and military power. Humanity had been a mystery. Some thought they were weak. Others believed they were too few to be a real threat. But now, Veen understood the truth. They were something else entirely. "Chancellor," one of the officers whispered, I think the Drens are losing." Veen exhaled shakily. "No," he murmured, "they've already lost." Aboard the Dren flagship, chaos erupted. Admiral Zorks, leader of the Dran invasion force, stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His fleet, his unstoppable armada, was falling apart. The humans weren't just winning. They were dismantling his forces piece by piece. They weren't supposed to be like this. "ZORX," bellowed, slamming a fist onto his command console. "We crushed their colonies. We outnumbered them 10-1. But no amount of shouting could change the reality before him. His forces were being wiped out. One of his officers turned, their expression grim. "Sir, we should retreat." Zor's claws dug into the metal railing. "Retreat! We are the Dren Empire, we do not." Boom, the ship shook violently, sparks flew, lights flickered. Direct hit to the starboard side, shields are failing. The hollow display showed the cause. The UTS Revenant was coming straight for them, and it was not slowing down. For the first time in his life, Zorks felt fear. He had underestimated the humans, and now he was going to pay the price. The once mighty Dren fleet was no more. What remained of their warships drifted in the void, burning wrecks, powerless husks, and shattered hulls. Some had managed to flee, but even they knew the truth. They hadn't just lost, they had been humiliated. Aboard the UTS Revenant, Admiral Kane stood in the center of the command deck, watching the final moments of the battle. His officers were already securing surrendering Dren's ships and transmitting victory reports back to Earth. But Kane knew one thing: this was just the beginning. "Sir, the Dren flagship has gone silent," one of his officers reported. "Their weapons are offline, their engines are dead, they have nowhere to go." Kane nodded. "Open a channel." The hollow screen flickered, revealing Admiral Zorks. The Dreen commander was no longer the arrogant, overconfident warlord he had been just hours ago. His once pristine uniform was scorched, his scales darkened by smoke and fire. The bridge behind him was in ruins, officers lying unconscious or slumped over their consoles. "You lost," Kane said simply. Zorx's claws dug into his ruined console. "You think this changes anything, human?" he spat. "You think because you won one battle, we will fear you?" Kane's expression remained calm. "I don't care if you fear us," he said. "I care that you understand one thing: we are not prey." Zorek snarled but said nothing. "You assumed we were weak," Kane continued. "You assumed we would break. You assumed wrong." The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then Kane leaned forward. "And if the Dran Empire ever comes for us again," he said, his voice low and cold, "we won't stop at just defeating you. We will end you." Zor's glare faltered for just a moment, then the transmission cut off. Kane exhaled, turning back to his officers. "Send boarding teams," he ordered. "Secure their flagship. Arrest every last one of them." "Yes, sir." Across the battlefield, human forces moved in, securing what was left of the Drin fleet. Prisoner transports were filled with captured warriors, and injured Dren soldiers were given medical treatment, something the Drens never would have offered humanity. But humans were different. They weren't just warriors. They were something more. On the surface of Zeles, Chancellor Veen could barely believe what he was seeing. The skies, once darkened by Dran warships, were now clear. The massive shadow of invasion had been lifted. The invincible enemy had been defeated by humans. "We should speak with Admiral Kane," General Chorus said, breaking the Chancellor's stunned silence. "We need to understand what happens next." Veen nodded. That was the real question, wasn't it? What happened next? The Drens had ruled the galaxy for centuries, their power unchecked, their forces unmatched. No one had ever stood against them and lived, until now. And that meant something far greater than just the liberation of Zelaris. This wasn't just a battle. This was the beginning of a new era. Veen turned toward the hollow display, where the human fleet now hovered in the skies like silent guardians. For the first time in his life, he felt something he never thought he would feel again: hope. Far away, deep within Tricken space, news of the defeat had reached the Dran High Command. The warlords of the Empire, seated around a vast, burning war table, listened in silence. The room was filled with the scent of smoldering incense and the deep growls of their leaders. Finally, Supreme Warlord Kavar spoke. "Humans," he muttered, the word filled with contempt and curiosity. One of his advisors, an old battle-scarred strategist, stepped forward. "My lord, this changes everything," he said carefully. Kavar's claws tightened around the arms of his throne. Yes, everything had changed, because the Dran Empire had never lost a war until now, and they would never forget it. The Dren High Command had ruled over the galaxy for centuries with absolute dominance. Their fleets were massive, their armies unstoppable, and their enemies always fell before them. But now, for the first time, a report sat before them that none of them wanted to read. The battle for Zeles had not only been a loss, it had been a disaster. Hundreds of Dricken warships had been annihilated. Their elite warriors, trained for conquest, had been captured or killed. Their proud Admiral Zorx had been humiliated and taken as a prisoner of war. And the worst part? It was humans who had done this. Inside the war chamber of the Imperial Throne Hall, Supreme Warlord Kavar sat upon his massive stone throne, his claws drumming against the armrest. Around him, the most powerful figures of the Dran Empire stood in tense silence. The massive hologram in the center of the chamber replayed the final moments of the battle. Human ships, small, fast, deadly, tearing through Dren warships with brutal efficiency. Advanced Dren defenses failing against unpredictable human tactics. The flagship of Admiral Zorx, the pride of the fleet, seized by the enemy. A deep growl rumbled in Kavar's throat. "This cannot be ignored," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "This is unacceptable." General Corval, one of the few survivors of the battle, stepped forward. His body was still wrapped in medical bindings, his scales ached from combat. He had barely escaped Zeles alive. "Supreme Warlord," Corval began, his voice filled with barely contained rage, "we underestimated them. Humanity, They fight like no species we have ever encountered. Their strategies are unpredictable, their weapons are advanced in ways we do not yet understand. Kavar's red eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that a race of primitive upstarts is more advanced than us?" Corval clenched his fists. "No, my lord, but they are different. They do not follow conventional tactics. They take insane risks in battle, things no logical commander would ever do, and yet somehow it works." One of the other warlords scoffed. "Then we should have wiped them out before they became a threat." Kavar's claws scraped against the stone throne. "Yes," he said darkly, "and now, because of our failure, the entire Empire knows of our weakness." A silence settled over the chamber. Every species in the galaxy had always feared the Dran Empire. No one had ever dared to challenge them. But now there would be whispers, there would be doubts. If humanity had defeated them once, could they do it again? Kavar stood. "We must act," he declared, his voice filling the vast chamber. "The Empire will not be humiliated. We will not allow these humans to believe they have won." Corval hesitated. "What do you command, my lord?" Kavar's eyes gleamed with cold fury. "We will gather our full strength. Not just a single fleet, not just an invasion force. We will bring the entire might of the Empire to humanity's doorstep. We will burn their worlds and remind them what it means to challenge the Drens." The warlords around the chamber roared in approval, their bloodlust ignited. But not Corval. He remained silent, his mind racing. Something about the way the humans had fought, the way they had adapted so quickly to Dren strategies, it unsettled him. This war was not going to be as simple as the others, and deep down, he feared that the Empire was about to make the biggest mistake in its history. Aboard the UTS Revenant, Admiral Kane knew exactly what was coming. The battle for Zeles had been a victory, but it wasn't the end. If anything, it had only awakened the beast. He stood on the observation deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space. Around the human fleet, recovery efforts were still underway. Zeles had been liberated, and for the first time in generations, its people were free from Dricken rule. But Kane knew the Drens would not let this stand. "They'll come," a voice said behind him. Kane turned to see Captain Riley approaching, her arms crossed. She didn't need to clarify. He knew exactly what she meant. "They won't just come," Kane said grimly. "They'll come with everything." Riley exhaled. "Then we better be ready." Kane nodded. "We will be." Because the battle for Zeles had proven one thing: humanity could fight. But the next battle, that would decide whether they could survive. The Dran Empire's war machine had finally arrived. From the dark void of space, an unstoppable fleet descended upon humanity's last line of defense. Thousands of warships, each armed with weapons capable of reducing planets to ash, spread across the system like a massive storm. The Imperial flagship, the Doomfang, loomed at the center, a dreadnought so large it cast a shadow over the battlefield. At its helm stood Supreme Warlord Kavar, his crimson eyes burning with vengeance. He had come to do one thing: erase humanity from existence. But on the other side of the battlefield, humanity was waiting. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the UTS Revenant, his hands gripping the console as he watched the enemy fleet advance. Every sensor, every scanner, every warning system blared with the sheer overwhelming power of the Drin Armada. No fleet in history had ever faced such odds and survived. And yet, Kane did not feel fear, because humanity had prepared for this moment. "Enemy fleet is charging weapons, sir," a lieutenant called out. Kane nodded. "Good, let them think we're afraid." The battle erupted in an instant. Massive beams of energy sliced through space, tearing through ships with devastating force. The Drens fired first, unleashing a storm of destruction meant to crush the human fleet in minutes. But the humans were already moving. Kane's fleet didn't fight like the Drens expected. They didn't stand their ground in a direct assault. Instead, human ships moved with unpredictable speed, darting through enemy fire, executing impossible maneuvers that no Dren commander could have foreseen. A wall of torpedoes launched from hidden platforms across the system. Dren warships, built for brute force, struggled to counter the overwhelming swarm of fast, intelligent weaponry. Explosions blossomed across the battlefield. For every human ship that fell, 3 Dren ships were destroyed in return. Kavar watched the chaos unfold from his flagship, his claws digging into the armrest of his throne. This wasn't possible. "How are they doing this?" he snarled. General Corval, standing beside him, already knew the answer. "They are not fighting like us," Corval growled. "They are adapting every second. Every ship they lose, they learn. They are not an empire like ours, built on conquest. They are warriors forged in the fire of survival." Kavar roared in fury. "Then we will crush them faster. All ships forward. Destroy their command ship." The Doomfang, the most powerful ship in the Drin fleet, turned its weapons toward the UTS Revenant. Its main cannon, capable of erasing entire moons, began charging. On the human flagship, alarms blared. "Sir, the enemy dreadnought is locking on." Kane's jaw tightened. "We knew this was coming." He turned toward Captain Riley. "Is the package ready?" She gave a grim nod. "Ready to deploy." Kane exhaled slowly. This was their last chance. If this failed, humanity was finished. Then let's show them what humans do when we're out of options. The Revenant suddenly lurched forward, heading straight for the Doomfang. Kavar sneered. "Fools, they are throwing themselves into the fire." But something was wrong. The human ship was broadcasting something, a tight-beam transmission, a signal sent directly into the heart of the Dren fleet. Before Kavar could react, his fleet systems began failing. Weapons shut down, shields collapsed, engines stalled. All across the battlefield, Treen ships were going dark. Corval's eyes widened in horror. "They hacked us." Kavar froze. It was true. Humanity hadn't just outfought the Drens, they had outsmarted them. While the battle raged, human operatives had infiltrated the Dren fleet's core systems. Every ship, every weapon, every system that relied on Dren technology had been corrupted. In the span of seconds, the greatest fleet in the galaxy was helpless. Kane watched as Dren ships drifted in confusion, their systems locked down. He leaned forward, his voice calm and unwavering. "Fire!" A storm of human weapons engulfed the enemy. With no defenses, no ability to fight back, the Dren fleet was torn apart. One by one, their massive warships exploded into fireballs, breaking apart like dying stars. Even the Doomfang, the Empire's pride, was ripped in half, its wreckage scattered across space.